I believe that Africa is rising and it wants to partner with us, not to be dependent, but to be self-sufficient.
Welcome to a special episode of West Wing Week Dispatches Africa. This week, the first family traveled to Africa for a three-country, four-stop visit that started in Dakar, Senegal, ended in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, with stops in Johannesburg and Cape Town, South Africa in between. There were drums and dancing, crowds and ceremonial pomp and circumstance, meetings, forums, summits and town halls, and moving trips to both Gorée Island and Robben Island. That's June 26th to July 4th, or Africa Rising. After traveling all day Wednesday, the first family arrived in Dakar, Senegal for their first stop on their three-country visit to Africa. First thing Thursday morning, it was off through streets lined several people deep to meet with the President and First Lady of Senegal. There, they met for bilateral meetings, some of which involved tea, and then the two presidents emerged for a news conference. Joined by Mariam Sall, Senegal's First Lady, Mrs. Obama kicked off the first of several events in Africa focused on education and youth leadership at the all-girls Martin Luther King Middle School, and launched her new Instagram account during a visit to one of the classrooms. You can follow along on Instagram with the obvious handle @MichelleObama and also @WhiteHouse. Check it out. Meanwhile, the president was across town at the Supreme Court of Senegal, where judges of the highest courts throughout Africa had gathered to meet and discuss the rule of law in light of Africa's rapidly changing landscape. Later, the president and the first family boarded a ferry to Gorée Island, a small island off the coast. It was a center point in the Atlantic slave trade for nearly 300 years. The First Lady reflected on the tour.
Time and again, both in America and around the world, we have seen that cruelty and oppression are no match for people of conscience who commit themselves to the cause of freedom.
After leaving the island, the president spent some time with the embassy staff and their families, getting down on their level, then capped off the night with an official dinner, toasting a glorious and epic full day in Senegal, and of course, the good health of all. À votre santé. On Friday, the president toured a food security summit in Dakar for some 21st century ag schooling.
Nutrition. This is a big part of your State of the Union call to end preventable child death in 2 decades.
And the same for the beans.
For the beans.
And this is like a ready-made meal?
Complete meal.
For children.
That you could eat, and right away you're getting all the nutrition you need.
On the way out, the president got a goodbye from some locals, Chicago locals that is, and then departed with the first family for their next stop, South Africa. On Saturday morning, the president arrived at the Union Buildings in Pretoria, the South African nation's capital, where he met with President Zuma for meetings, held a joint news conference. Then it was on to the University of Johannesburg in Soweto for the Young African Leaders Initiative Town Hall. Participants took part in a Q&A session with the president, some via video conference from neighboring nations. Meanwhile, at the Sai Bono Discovery Center, the First Lady participated in her own video conference of sorts, where students in South Africa were brought together with students across the U.S. for a lively town hall about the importance of education. Backstage after the event, the First Lady and some of the hangout participants posed together for an Instagram taken by the First Lady herself, known as a selfie.
This counts as a selfie, even though she's way
Who called it? It is a selfie, yes it is.
Does that work? We got everyone. Look at you.
We got everybody.
It's going out.
Yeah, let's do this.
Then it was back to the Capitol for the official dinner with toasts and dancing, of course. On Sunday, the first family traveled to the Cape Town home of the towering Table Mountain, and just off the coast, the infamous Robben Island. From the 1960s through the 1990s, this island housed a maximum security prison. Many of the prisoners there were activists who worked to bring down apartheid, the South African government's policies that discriminated against people of color. On the island, they visited the rock quarry, where prisoners endured hours of backbreaking work in the hot sun. And they visited Nelson Mandela's cell. And the First Lady again took time to reflect upon the impact of the visit.
While very few of us will ever encounter the kind of discrimination and brutality that Nelson Mandela endured, all of us can learn important lessons from his struggle. We can learn about the importance of standing up for what you believe in, no matter what the cost. We can learn about how, with self-discipline and courage, we can overcome the most unthinkable hardships. And we can learn about the power of forgiveness, to turn enemies into friends, and to help us move forward from a troubled past to a more hopeful future.
Later, President Obama stopped by the Desmond Tutu HIV Foundation Youth Center, an after-school program whose community has many HIV-infected youth. The president and Archbishop Tutu met with young men and women of the center, where one student showed off his rapping skills, prompting the president to give him some advice on how to conclude future performances.
You gotta drop the mic.
Later, the president spoke at the University of Cape Town about the global health investments that are moving us closer to an AIDS-free generation. He also announced a new initiative, Power Africa, which will double access to power in sub-Saharan Africa through strategic partnerships with the U.S. government and the private sector. If it's Monday, it must be Tanzania. It was time for the third and final country on this week-long trip, and the first family found themselves amid the kind of welcome and celebration that most Monday mornings don't get to see. The revelry continued as the two presidents and first ladies made their way up to the official welcome on the steps of the State House. Then it was on to meetings and a scenic news conference in the late afternoon sun. Over at the National Museum and House of Culture, the First Lady was joined by Tanzanian First Lady Salma Kikwete to place flowers at the U.S. Embassy bombing memorial and hold a moment of silence in remembrance of the 1998 terror attacks. Later, she took in the gravity-defying acrobatic feats of the Baba Wawatoto dance performance, which for the curious viewers out there is Swahili for father of children. Across town, the president convened a roundtable with CEOs and a forum of business leaders to discuss the ways to support unleashing the next era of African growth through partnerships and expanding sectors like manufacturing that are rooted in equality and shared interests. Then it was time for the official dinner and toasts on the last night of the trip, made all the better with slide trombone accompaniment. On the last day of the trip, the First Lady joined former First Lady Laura Bush and several other current and former African First Ladies at, you guessed it, the First Ladies Summit. Here, she participated in a panel discussion focusing on health, economic empowerment, and education for women in Africa. The president started out his day at the U.S. Embassy, spending some time with the staff there, and then held a wreath-laying ceremony with victims of the embassy bombing and their families. He was joined by the 43rd President of the United States.
Thank you so much.
The president then wound his way through the crowd-lined streets of Dar es Salaam to meet up with President Kikwete for the very last stop of the trip, the Ubongo power plant, where the president spoke about his new Power Africa initiative, which will bring electricity to the 70% of Africans who currently live without it. He previewed a perfect example of the bold kind of thinking that will help achieve this ambitious goal, the innovative socket ball.
30 minutes of play,
30 minutes of
several
play,
hours of life.
Several hours of light, or you can now plug in,
Charge your cell phone.
and you can charge your cell phone.
Then it was on to the airport, where it was time to bid farewell and make the 15-hour trip through the friendly skies back home.